Hello, my fellow aviators. My name is Trent. I'm a CFI, CFII, and MEI in the real world with about 12 or 1,300 hours of dual given. And in today's video, we are going to do an IFR training mission where we're going to fly the ILS runway 29 approach into Torrance, California, which is Zimperni Field that you can see on the screen. And I'm designing this video so that you can use Microsoft Flight Simulator yourself to follow along. This was actually a training session that I did with one of my students in an FAA approved simulator just yesterday, and the training went so well that I wanted to create the video both for my student to be able to watch repetitively, to let all of the knowledge sink in, as well as to help other aspiring pilots or real world pilots to get some free IFR training here on YouTube. So if you'd like to replicate this training, here's what you need to do. Pick yourself a 172 with a G1000 in it. Start your flight, your departure in the air at a waypoint called Seaward. Your arrival is going to be into KTOA. Then you're going to want to go into flight conditions and make sure that you choose overcast, save and back, and then you can go ahead and jump into the airplane. All right, once you're in the airplane, what I want you to do is get yourself, it's going to spawn you probably at around 1,800 feet or so, climb up to 2,500 feet, and then I want you to engage the autopilot in heading mode on a heading of somewhere around 308 degrees. And so in order to do that, you're going to go ahead and hit the heading button. You'll spin the Alt knob until you get to 2,600 feet. If you're lower than that, you'll click flight level change, and pitch up the aircraft until it gets up, and you can fly it by hand, whatever it is. You just need to get to around 2,500 feet on this heading on autopilot. So once you've got that done, the next thing I want you to do is replicate the weather. We need to make an adjustment to the cloud. So this lower level of clouds here, we're going to drag the bottom down to about 206 feet, and let's take the top. Actually, we'll make the top. We'll leave it right around here, should be sufficient. Okay, so once you've got that done, you're going to be happily flying ahead. And at this point in time in your flight in the real world, when you're getting near your destination airport, you can expect ATC, because you're going to be, if it's an IFR flight plan, you're going to be talking to approach. They're going to say something along the lines of, our call sign is 77 Whiskey. So they're going to say, approach 77 Whiskey, what approach do you want into Torrance? And then you would write back, or say back, 77 Whiskey, we'd like to request the ILS 29 via Albus. Albus is the initial approach fix. And I'll show you later in the video how to determine what that initial approach fix is. And then ATC would reply with something along the lines of 77 Whiskey, you can expect the ILS 29 right via Albus. So when you hear the word expect, that is your cue to go ahead and program the approach. So to do that, you're going to hit the proc button. You're going to select approach. Coincidentally, 29 right is the top of the list. So we're going to hit enter. We're going to scroll down until we get to Albus. We're going to hit enter. We're not going to put the minimums in just now because I'm going to explain to you later where to get the minimums from the approach chart. So we're going to click load. And you can go ahead and click enter again. And at this point in time, they're probably going to say something to you a few minutes later or what have you. They're going to say something to the effect of 77 Whiskey, proceed direct Albus, which would be a clearance to do just that. Or they might say you're cleared for the approach via Albus. Now we're going to deal with the first scenario, proceed direct Albus. So you're going to click on this mouse or the outer knob. You're going to turn it down to Albus. Then you're going to go direct to Albus, enter, enter, and click the nav button. What that's going to do is that is going to put the aircraft on, it's going to engage the navigation mode of your autopilot. So you should see GPS. It's going to tell you that you're about 4 minutes away from Albus, roughly, and you're headed in that direction. Now, the other thing that you might, I'm going to put an active pause on here just to buy us some time. Is active pause working? Oh, let me fix it. So the next thing that you're probably going to want to do, and this is optional if you're using Foreflight, You could probably do something similar in the EFB, so I'll show that after this, but let's first of all bring Foreflight up onto the screen. So as you can see, in the top, in the flight plan section, I've got Seaward and CODA, or CODA, I guess that's the easiest way to say that. So you're going to click the procedure button. You're going to click the approach, 29 right, Albus, and add to route. When you do that, what Foreflight is going to do, it's going to overlay the approach plate on top of the map. What I do is I then touch the approach plate. I view it full screen, so I can have it here on this screen. Then I go back to the map and I remove it. That's merely a personal preference. So now you can see that our aircraft is headed towards Albus, which is the initial approach fix for this particular plate. Now we'll have a look at the EFB and we will see what we can do that is something similar to that. So here we've got a flight plan. So we've got our departure, and it only allows a departure airport, but here we go, Seaward. So VFR, we may not be able to do this. Let's try change procedure. Here we go, ILS 29 right, via Albus, change procedure. Excellent. And then if you go back to the route and you zoom out, there's our aircraft and there's the approach. So it's very similar to what we did on Foreflight. The difference, and you actually have the approach plates here as well, which is actually a really cool new feature. So if you want to get to the approach plate, you're going to click on this, and then you're going to click on this, and then you're going to click on approaches, 29 right, make sure you're in FAA mode. And for whatever reason, the charts are not showing up here, and they should be. So I'm going to chalk that up to another Microsoft Flight Simulator bug. Okay, so back into Flight Sim, I'm going to turn off the active pause, so we're starting to get closer to our waypoint. And then what we're going to do is we need to brief the approach. And what briefing the approach means, it means reading the approach plate. So let's pull our iPad back up. Let's pull up the plate, and then I'll walk you through a briefing on the correct way to brief it. And we have about 3 minutes to do this until we get to Albus, and so I think we can get it done before then. The very first thing you want to do is make sure is, hey, am I looking at the right plate? So you can see here the ILS 29 right into Torrance KTOA. So we're in fact looking at the correct plate. The next thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that in the real world you're going to be listening to an ATIS. So you would put in 125.6 into one of your communication radios. Then you're going to look at your localizer frequency, which is 111.9, and you're going to want to make sure that that localizer frequency is active in nav1, and you can see that it is, in this case, the active frequency is the inner frequency, and you can also see that it says ITOA. So we know that we have the correct frequency added in, and that's going to be really important later on. So now let's get rid of the, let's go back to the iPad. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to understand, okay, well, where am I coming from? We're going to look at what's called the plan view. Where am I coming from and what am I going to do and so forth? And just to give myself just a little bit more time here, we're going to put it back on active pause. All right, so now we know we're coming in from this fix down here called Albus. We're at 2,500 feet. After Albus, we have something called Driffy, and you'll notice you'll see Driffy down here in the profile view as well, and you can see this 2,000 foot. That means when we're headed towards Driffy, we need to be at or above 2,000 feet. If it had a line on top of it as well, which it does not, we would have to be right at 2,000 feet. We should be on a heading of roughly 294 between Driffy and Zilba, which is this next one here. And then we've got the runway threshold down here. So Zilba is what we call the final approach fix. So if you look down here at the profile view, you're going to see this Maltese cross right there and the beginning of the feather that is part of the approach. That tells you that at that point in time, your descent down to the runway threshold should begin, and you should be on a heading of 294 with a glide slope of around 3 degrees. And we're going to talk more about how the autopilot's going to handle that for us. And then the next thing about briefing the plate is you have to understand, well, what are the minimums? So if we scroll down here, we can see that we've got a straight in landing on runway 29 right. We do have a local altimeter setting. We would have got that from the ATIS. So that means our minimums are 381 feet with a half-mile of visibility. So what does all that mean? Well, the first part of it, the visibility, means if I'm out here somewhere on my way to the final approach fix, headed in this direction, if I don't have at least a half-mile of visibility, I cannot even begin the approach, and I would have to fly to one of my alternates. Assuming that I have at least a half-mile, when I get to this point in time and I start my descent down the glide slope, if I get to 381 feet MSL, and I don't see the runway environment in sight, that means, according to 91.175, I am not legal to attempt a landing. And that means I need to go missed, which is what we're going to do in today's lesson, because it's really important for you guys to understand how to fly the missed approach. So then, once we've briefed that and we know our minimums, then we're going to look over here at the missed approach, which is this section right here. And you can see we've got quite a mouthful of instructions. It says climb to 3,000 feet on a heading of 294 to cross the LAX VOR on the 150 radial, then climbing left turn on a heading of 250 and outbound on the LAX VOR radial 192 to the initial fix and then of LAX and then hold. And that is visually shown in this bit right here. And then this arrow here is this arrow here, and so there's the hold. So you can see it says we'll go on a heading of 294, cross the 150 radial of LAX, then go to 250 until you get to the 192 radial, and then fly outbound on the 192 radial until you get to the hold. And we're going to work our way through all of that in this particular lesson. So that is how you brief the approach plate. And then the other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to compare the information in your, here, the easiest way to do this is we'll scroll down a little bit like so. So you've got your ILS 29 right up at the top. You're going to want to make sure that these waypoints, Albus, and then Driffy, and then Zilba, they match what's on the approach plate. And so you can see when we go down to either of these views, you can see we have Driffy, we have Zilba, and so everything in our autopilot matches what we have on the approach plate. So that means we're all good to go. So at this point in time, what you're very likely to hear from ATC is that you are now cleared for the ILS 29 right via Albus. So at that point in time, there is something that you need to do in the aircraft. You need to go down and hit the this little button here called approach. And when you do that over on the PFD, you're going to notice some letters showed up. You're going to notice that the GS stands for glide slope. And what that means when it's in white is it means that the glide slope is armed. I think I might still be in active pause. So now we've got glide slope is armed and the localizer is armed. Now, if you were to, when you're doing an ILS approach, if you hit this approach mode button and this does not show up, it's because you don't have your localizer frequency set to the correct frequency. Now, when you load this approach, it automatically sets that frequency for you. But one of the things when you're managing your automation that you want to be very, very sure to do is when you have time, like we do here, you want to make sure that you've got that frequency in. The other thing that we need to do is we've been cleared for the approach, and according to the approach plate, which you can still see on the screen, we can be at or above 2,000 feet at Driffy, and Albus we should really be at 2,000 feet. So we want to get down to 2,000 feet. So we're going to spin the little knob, we're going to hit vertical speed down, And we're going to go down at 500 feet per minute and probably pull back power a little bit as well. Descent's in a 172, somewhere around 2,000 RPM for a standard rate of descent when you're doing an instrument flight. So we have about 43 seconds. You can see that here until we get to this fix. Okay, so we're going to acknowledge that handoff. We'll see what they say to us in the future. So we're getting close now. We're about 18 seconds away. So we're just barely going to make it. We might want to just increase our descent rate just a little bit because it's super important that we get relatively close to the altitudes that are on the approach plate. Now you can see that we're turning, and our next fix is this 303F, which is not part of the approach plate. So this is a Microsoft Flight Simulator specific fix, so we're not going to really worry about that one too much. So Driffy is going to be after that. So we have between this 5.7 miles and Driffy, we still have about 7.7 miles to go until we get to Driffy. So there wasn't really any panic for that that descent, because the Zilba being the final approach fix, and you can see that right here, FAF by Zilba. That's where we want to make sure that we're really down. Oops, our airspeed's a little slow there. Add a little power back. That's when we will make sure we intercept the final approach fix as close to the number here, or the number that's on the approach plate, as possible. So now you've kind of got some free time on your hands. You're on your way to Driffy. You're in GPS mode. You've been cleared for the approach. You haven't been cleared to land. Only Tower can clear you to land, but you've been cleared for the approach, which means you can follow all the instructions that is on the approach plate. And you really just kind of want to pay attention to your automation and make sure that everything's going as you expect it to go. And there's one other thing you can do. So if we bring the plate back up, and we want to read that missed approach again, because we want to configure as much of our automation to handle the missed approach as possible before we get there. So the first thing is right here, the LAX VOR is 113.6. So it would be a pretty good idea to click this. Here, let's go get a closer look. We're going to click this button here, and we're going to tune in 113.6, and we're going to put it over in the active, and we're going to just very temporarily put ourselves in heading mode. Notice the heading bug is at the top, and I just want to put us in heading mode for a minute because we're going to do something. So now we're in heading mode. We clicked this CDI button down here because we want to pre-program this by spinning the course knob to 150, because on missed, as described in the missed approach procedure on the plate, the first radial that we would need to intercept of the LAX VOR is the 150 radial. And by doing this now, you're taking it off of your plate.
GFR ahead.
When you'd have to be doing it later, which you're going to be, generally speaking, pretty busy if you're doing a missed approach. So now we can put back CDI back to magenta lines. We can hit nav again to put us in GPS mode, and we're going to actually have to rearm the approach mode. So we're going to do that, click that button again, and there's our white glide slope and our white localizer. So all we've done is just taken a little work off of our plate for later on when we go missed, because as you're going to see, things can sort of happen relatively quickly if you're not completely prepared. And so we'd like to avoid putting ourselves in a situation where we're not completely prepared. So here you can see now we have picked up the localizer, and the magenta line is now a green line. We're still in nav mode. So that happened automatically because we're in approach mode. So now, instead of using GPS to line us up with the runway, we're actually using the ILS, which stands for Instrument Landing System, and it's ground-based equipment. So we're established on the localizer. We're still in nav mode because loc is a nav mode like GPS is a nav mode. So this is going to keep us lined up with the runway. But you can see the glide slope is not armed yet. And you can see the bottom half here of this, it's a diamond. It's a green diamond. And that is the glide slope. When it gets down to here, when this green diamond comes down here, that means this is going to turn green. So right now the glide slope is above us. And that makes sense because if you look at the approach plate, you can see we are not, Zilba is the final approach fix. And you can see our little blue aircraft right there headed towards Zilba, but we're not at Zilba yet. And because this, so that means this line here would be going up above us. And so we're somewhere, out there. And that is why the glide slope is above us. As we get closer, it's going to gradually work its way down. So now we're about 1.5 miles from the final approach fix, and we need to configure the aircraft for landing. So in a Cessna 172, what that means is that we want to be at a speed of roughly 90 knots, and we want to add some 10 degrees of flaps. So we're at 98 knots. In a 172, you can add your first 10 degrees of flaps. So we're going to go ahead and add our 10 degrees of flaps. In a Cessna 172, you can add 10 degrees of flaps below 110. You can see now that that diamond has started to come down, and there we have captured the glide slope. And we're now pulling back the power a little bit because we want to get to around 90 knots. So what we're looking for here is what's called a stabilized approach. So reduce power a little further, and our airspeed's starting to go down. So a stabilized approach means that we're on the glide path, which we are because the green diamond is in the middle. Then we're on the final approach course, which we are because this is all lined up. Then we're on speed, which we are. Then we're fully configured with our landing gear. In this case, we have fixed gear, so we don't have to put the gear down. And we've got our flaps down, which you saw me doing. Our rate of descent is around 500 feet per minute, which it is. And the power is properly set for approach, and our approach checklist is complete. So again, I'll just hit active pause here for a minute. Now, another cool thing about this is you can click in your EFB on the aircraft, go to checklists, and you can scroll down and go in flight, and you can go descent, and you can see, okay, we've got power as required. Mixture should be full rich at this point in time. We've got our barometer set. Our standby altimeter is set, our fuel selector valve is on both, and our flaps is as desired. So we have our entire, descent checklist done. So let's go back off of active pause and continue on down. Now I might need to make the weather a little worse. So let's do that. Let's take this cloud layer.
Caution, TFR ahead.
And put it up. And we'll increase the density a little bit. So if you can see out the window and you don't want to be able to see out the window, make sure you just make the clouds a little worse. So now everything is going exactly as we planned. You can see on the iPad, if we go to the approach plate, there we are, heading down the feather.
Final runway 2.
There we go. We have approximately a 2-mile final. Everything is going exactly as we hoped it would go, but guess what? So now, by the way, the other thing you can do is take your altimeter and spin it up to 3,000 because that's the altitude that we're going to need to climb, and center your heading bug by clicking on the heading button. Because when we go missed, we're going to leave it on autopilot, and we're going to follow the instructions that are on the approach plate. So I rotated the altitude button back to 3,000 because that's what we have to climb to. And I centered the heading bug because I might need to put it in heading mode and I don't want the plane to change direction. So we've got a little problem. We can see the runway environment. So in the real world, we would be legal to land at this point in time. But for this particular lesson, we don't want to be able to see the runway environment. So let me see if I can somehow, there we go. We'll get rid of that runway environment completely. Now we can't see anything, which is exactly what we're looking for. So Remember, minimums for this particular approach are 381 feet. We're at 640. So we'll get down to 381. Then I'm going to put it on active pause again and clear up the clouds just so you can see how close to the ground we are. We'd be about 284 feet AGL at that point in time, but I want you to be able to see what that looks like out the window. Because minimums, if you're flying to minimums in the real world, it's really, really low. And there's a couple of other things. Okay, there we go. Active pause. So we went down, we're just now below minimums. We cannot see the runway environment. So we would have to go mist. Now for perspective, let's just change this to clear skies. So this is where we are. Normally in VFR, this would be really, really easy to land, but guess what? We are not legal to land in this particular training scenario because we can't see, and I'll have to just take that and drag that back down again and increase the density there. And so now we're not legal to land. So what are you supposed to do at this point in time? Well, at this point in time, there's a process for flying the mist approach. If you have a toga button, now some air toga stands for take off, go around. So if you have a toga button, you would hit that. This particular 172 does not have a toga button. It would be down here somewhere in a real 172. Typically, it's right there. And all that toga button does is it tells the autopilot that you're going around. So this is where it's really good to have your new altitude bugged and you're going to be in heading mode because here's what's going to happen. We are going to power up. In other words, we're going to add power. We're going to tell so that's power up, pitch up, clean up, and fess up. So what does all that mean? So power up, obviously, we're going to go ahead and add power. Pitch up means we need to get the airplane's nose going back up again because of the downward momentum of gravity. We're actually going to end up going below minimums. So part 91.175 on a precision approach, it is legal to go below minimums ever so slightly. It's just not legal to attempt to land. And then we're going to retract our flaps, and then I'll tell you what the ATC call would be. So we're going to unpause. I'm going to add power. We're going to go over here, and we're going to go flight level change. We're going to put it in heading mode too, by the way. And we're going to start this. We're going to decrease our airspeed. We want to start climbing at, say, 80 knots. So you notice flight level change, 80 knots. And then we're going to retract our flaps. And at this point in time, your radio call would be something to the effect of 77 Whiskey is going mist. And so that alerts ATC that you weren't able to get where you wanted to go. And so you're going to go mist. So the next thing that you need to do, so let's active pause the aircraft. Now remember, in the instructions, all this whole mouthful here basically says we stay on a heading of 294. So you would actually turn your heading bug until it was at 294. So on a heading of 294, you're going to climb to 3000, and then you're going to cross the LAX VOR radial 150. Now LAX is on nav 2, so that means we need to switch it to nav 2. So as you can see, as we get closer, there's our little blue aircraft, and you can see that the radial is here. So we're eventually going to cross that radial. Now we kind of have quote unquote free time on our hands until we cross that radial. And it does look as though if you left it on GPS, it would literally fly the whole thing. And so if you have that option, just leave it on GPS because it's much easier than what I'm showing you here. But what I'm showing you here is the way to fly it as it's published in the event that your autopilot either didn't have it or started to not do it correctly, or you didn't have an autopilot and you had to hand fly it. So this is what we do. What we're looking for, this is the 150 radial of the LAX VOR. We're not at that radial yet because it's ahead of us. This line here is going to start moving over this way, And when it is all lined up, then we're going to turn left to a heading of 250. Okay, so now you can see that that needle has started to move. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just start rotating over to, or turning left to a heading of 250. And well, we timed that pretty well. I mean, you're looking for that line to be lined up right like that. And now we're going to turn left on 250. So if we pull our iPad back up again, you can see our aircraft. Now, it doesn't matter that you're not lined up exactly with the dotted lines on the approach plate. What matters is that we've crossed the 150 radial. We're now on a heading of 250, and the next thing we need to do is turn the 192 radial, which will be ahead of us again, so keep going to 192. We're going to intercept this, and then we want to fly outbound. So we can also arm nav again. And why didn't that work? There we go. I didn't click it hard enough. So now we're in heading mode on a heading of 251. In this case, we're supposed to be on 250. There we go. And we're going to fly, and as we're getting closer to the 192 radial of the LAX VOR, the navigation system, this VOR is going to turn green, and the heading bug is going, oh, sorry, the iPad was in the way. So we're flying now towards the 192 radial. And when we get closer to it, and this needle here starts to move like it did before, the fact that we've used nav to put it in nav mode, and that's why VOR is armed, this is going to turn green and the heading is going to go away. So we'll just wait for that to happen. And there we go, right there. You can see VOR just switched to green. That means now the avionics has intercepted the VOR, and the aircraft is in the process of intercepting the VOR. And then we are going to fly outbound on the 192 radial until we get into the hold. So now we want to go back over to the MFD. Let's click this. I don't know why it's not centered for us. So, oh, there we go. There's our plane. And it's not got magenta lines anymore because we're not really following this anymore. Now, what do you do at this point? How do we get into the hold? Well, there we go. So here's where we're going. This is the hold right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a teardrop entry. We're going to cross over this waypoint, Inish, which is the first, it's the intercept waypoint right here of the missed approach on a heading of 192, which is what we're going to be on because we're going to be on the 192 radial. The correct and holds are generally a right-hand turn, like so. So we're going to come in and do what's called a teardrop entry. It's the easiest way to remember how to enter a hold. It's the least sharp turn. Obviously, we're not going to come in here and crank it left because that would be a super sharp turn. A parallel entry would be to come here and fly out parallel, but that's somewhat sharp. But if we come in this way and then do a teardrop entry and then enter the hold that way, and then we'd fly around the hold until ATC told us otherwise. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You could put it back in heading mode and literally just adjust your heading bug to line your aircraft up with the racetrack. Or what you can do is you could push this button, choose Inish, go direct to, okay, and now you could put it back in GPS mode and put it in nav mode, and it's going to do it all for you just beautifully. And there it is. It's even drawn out that teardrop entry for us. Remember, it's the least sharp turn as you're passing over the initial approach fix for the hold. And so at this point in time, we've flown the published approach. We've got it figured out how we're going to get in the hold, and we're just going to hang out in the hold until such time as ATC gives us our next instruction. So that's the end of this lesson, guys. I hope you found it really, really useful. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions in the comments. And if you want to see more lessons like this, maybe consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. I'd be very happy to have you. Thanks very much and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.